Yeah.
Well, why don't we go ahead and get ourselves started? This week, I want to do some review of the conversations that we've had these past few weeks about the Supper of the Lamb. And just as a summary, draw out some ideas. What does this all mean? What does the idea of feasting and hospitality and abundance, God's abundance, and our experience of abundance, what does that mean for us? And especially, this is what I really want to talk about. We spent all of Lent discerning vision together, and you brought so much to the table, and I appreciate it so much. We ended Lent at a point of formulating just a few words that we think that God is leading us into for the next season or seasons, the next years. And the words are gathering, especially gathering people who have been alienated for any number of reasons, but gathering people in our church, gathering people in the community, gathering churches, our downtown churches together. So gathering and evangelism, sharing the good news of Jesus. I think that's hard language. I'm with you, Greg. That language very quickly about evangelism gets it goes over me. But I heard a nice formulation last week, making Jesus real to people. Helping them get to know Jesus, who is a friend to us. So those two words, gather and evangelize, or make Jesus real for people. And that in the context of building God's kingdom in downtown Murfreesboro. So we have a location, downtown Murfreesboro. We have a purpose. It's God's kingdom that we're building. And I think maybe we ended up with growing God's kingdom, which is an organic metaphor, gardening metaphor. So, growing God's kingdom in downtown Murfreesboro through gathering, through evangelism. So that's where I want us to aim. But let us go back and remember what we talked about these past few weeks. So we spent the first week just talking about abundance, about celebratory meals. Do you remember all the holiday meal stories that you all shared and how wonderful they were? Ron Messier's family's special meat pie, and the traditions that have meant so much to us, that anchor us. They tell us who we are. They remind us who we are. They remind us who we belong to. And so there's that the abundance that we experience at those holiday meals is also a way that we learn our identity. What else do you remember about that first conversation that we had about this, the Supper of the Lamb, when we were telling holiday stories?
Well, I remember a lot of talk about relationships, that these were all celebrations with people gathered, and very warm relationships. So they're not, it's not generally among strangers, although strangers may have been there, but yeah, relationships.
Mm-hmm. Thank you, David. And we all have those stories. By the end of that day, we were all feeling so happy. And it was connecting for us to share those stories. We felt like we were coming home to one another too. The next week, we talked about our simple at home growing up. And what do you remember about that conversation? I remember David Rowe sharing about his mom's chicken pie.
Yeah,
I remember talking about leftovers, using leftovers in a different way,
Mhm.
stretching it a little bit.
I remember Joyce talking, we all had these stories because most of us grew up in families of modest means. Joyce talking about how, maybe there wasn't a whole lot of food to go on the table, but her mom would cut it up small and put it in a lot of bowls. And, by the end of the meal, everybody had enough.
Couldn't help.
Sorry.
I couldn't help but think when I heard it again, it's just a simple slogan. It's not the food, it's the folks.
Mm.
And that just sums it up for me. We plan around a meal, but it's not the food, it's the folks that gather.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. That's always the people, isn't it? Greg, I loved your stories, 6 kids and feeding that crew meal after meal, day after day.
Yep, that was quite a time. And then my grandmother's garden, which was so big, and it was kind of a time to go talk with her. She was a crusty person, but really, really, really kind heart. So those were good times. Good times.
Yeah, we talked a lot about growing our own food, didn't we? Or grandmas who would grow the food, and we would be able to get produce like we just can't buy at a grocery store anymore.
Right. I think Joyce might have talked about that some.
Mm-hmm. When I was growing up, we had a big garden in our backyard, and it's pretty hard to garden in Montana. The days are short, the nights are cold. We would get one tomato that we would share between all of us. And every year, my dad would rototill the garden. One of my uncles ranched sheep, and of course, sheep manure is such a good fertilizer. So we'd bring in this stinking truckload of sheep manure, rototill it in, and we had an asparagus bed. And I don't think maybe my dad really liked asparagus, is all I can think. But every year he would rototill up part of that asparagus bed. And I remember my mom saying, "John, you got into the asparagus."
Yeah. That's not easy stuff to grow. So.
No, that's right. That's right.
Yeah, that's one of my favorite memories when we lived on Cherry Lane, is the fact that we had a big garden in the back and we did have asparagus. And it was always so much fun. We were lucky if I got into the house with any of the asparagus, because I tended to stand out there and eat it.
It's just so good, isn't it? Fresh picked.
Yep. The deer like it too.
Oh, that's unfortunate.
Yeah. Well.
What about hospitality? We then spent the next week talking about experiences, especially of receiving hospitality. Ron told this amazing story of, it was like these kids were angels who appeared with a tray of scrambled eggs and bread. And
Yep.
And there was no other visible sign of civilization anywhere around. I mean, I don't even know.
And I wonder if they tell the story and they say, there were these American angels who showed up. We fed them.
Yeah, and David had his story about going out on his bike trip through the hills, coming in hungry, thinking he hadn't planned that part of the trip out. How do you eat?
That's right.
Food showed up. Hey.
That's right. That's right.
Of course, if it hadn't, maybe he wouldn't have been here today. So we only hear the positive stories.
That's right. What about loaves and fishes kinds of experiences? Do you have Do you have stories about, when there wasn't enough, like David told the story, and Ron, there was no food and then all of a sudden there was food. Do you have other stories about that? I have a story about what are the green nuts called? Pistachio. Do you remember in the late 70s, pistachio salad was all the rage? Do you remember that? It was like you use the green Jello pudding and then you put in, I don't know, sour cream and
Wow.
coconut and, pretty gross, but it was all the rage.
Oh
and,
man, it must have tasted great.
And my mom had a salad potluck one day, ladies' luncheon for church. And she had made the pistachio salad. And the next person showed up and they brought the pistachio salad. And then the next person showed up and they brought the pistachio salad. Everybody came and everybody had brought pistachio salad. And I don't think we ever had it again after that.
Yep.
We've had a
That's
couple,
happened at some covered dish suppers at St. Paul's way back when. Everybody, once in a while, it's like a roulette wheel. Everybody shows up with chicken. There's nothing to go with the chicken.
John, the one I remember so much at church was the one when they all showed up with dessert.
Oh, that was a good one.
Finally, somebody went out and got a bucket of chicken that time.
Yeah, Jane, that may be what I was trying to remember. An event where all of a sudden, there wasn't very much food, but then yeah, it's just kind of showed up, and it wasn't a feast in the sense that we got to pick what we wanted to eat, but we all ate, and it was plenty, and it was fine. Yeah.
I found that when we had a dinner like that, it's flying right by me. I'm sorry. I don't remember what I'm trying to say, so it's gone.
It'll come back. It'll come back.
Oh, I found out what it was. It's well, it's if you have an off week on food, you'll find out the next week there will really be a lot.
For the same thing.
That's right. It's the law of natural consequences with potlucks.
Mhm. I remember one Thanksgiving for dessert, absolutely everybody brought pumpkin pie. It was nothing but pumpkin pie. It wasn't my favorite, but
Well, a good dollop of vanilla ice cream will always help.
Uh-huh.
Pumpkin pie.
Thinking about loaves and fishes, the miracle of enough food. I remember one time, I must have been 3 or 4, and this was the 70s. This was the height of the energy crisis, and nobody had anything. And it must have been a Sunday that one of my dad's graduate students showed up, and mealtime came, and usually the graduate students would go at mealtime, but this one didn't make any movements toward going. And finally, my mom realized there was no food in the graduate student's house, and we must have had precious little at that time either. But she could always work a miracle in the kitchen. She pulled out saltine crackers and a block of cheddar cheese and some butter, and maybe there was a can of tomato soup, and it was. I don't remember that story except by hearing it. So I just think there must have been enough food that I never thought, oh, there was this weird meal that there wasn't enough to go around.
I
remember as a kid, my dad and a friend of his and I fishing, literally fishing, and it was fishing season and the fish were biting really good the whole year. So we had planned on eating fish for lunch and we didn't even bring anything else to the little camp we went to. And we were in this Oxbow Lake in South Alabama and we fished all morning and had not caught anything. And it was getting close to lunchtime and we were like, uh-oh. If I'm still there.
Yeah, you're still here.
So we were like making our way back to the boat landing in this little aluminum boat. And all of a sudden we came out of a treetop and we caught a fish and we're fishing with a cork and sinker. And like we think we need like 8 fish to have a meal for all of us. And all of a sudden we just start catching fish and the big thunderstorm coming in and the lightning's coming and we're catching these fish. And finally we have like 7 and we need 8. And we had 2 corks go out at the same time. And we're like, oh, we're gonna have more than enough. And one fish had bitten both of the minnows. So my dad's friend and I both pulled up. We had the same fish. Put them in the boat, and when the lightning's cracking, and we go to the boat landing and go up and cook the fish. But it was exactly enough fish.
Oh, that's amazing.
Oh, somebody's got a dog. Oh.
Apparently he needs to be taken care of.
You know, it's just so fun to hear the themes of abundance. We talked one week about the kingdom economy. You know, it's somehow God makes it so there's abundance. And I think he kind of delights to do his best work when it looks like it's going to be really hard. You know, how could there possibly be enough? And ta-da! God does something and, you know, provision comes to us from unexpected places. And so there's enough. Well, how does this connect to you with a call on St. Paul's to gather and to make Jesus real to the people in our downtown neighborhood? How does this connect to the call upon us to grow God's kingdom in downtown Murfreesboro?
Always a question.
Yeah, that's a question that takes some thought, doesn't it?
Well, it does, especially since there's several churches downtown. And, you know, so we have to be careful and not tread on somebody else's toes in the process, but we've also joined together with other churches to present things. And I think that's really one of the things that can be done.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's a conversation that keeps coming up again and again and again, is people saying we want to gather with our sister downtown churches to, you know, to serve the poor, to take care of the homeless, to feed those who are hungry.
Christine, shortly after you came, like it was within the first 3 or 4 weeks after you got there, we had some kind of session in the parish hall where we were talking about, I don't even remember exactly what the subject was, but you mentioned this, and you mentioned it as kind of a crazy idea that probably would never happen. But what if, this is you talking now, what if all of the churches on some Sunday, instead of having their service at home, at their place, did it around the square? We would each, you know, sort of gather around the square and see what each other did. Do you remember that?
I don't. That does sound like something I would say, though. I would shoot right out with that.
I mean, and I remember that I said, well, what a crazy idea that is. I said, but boy, it would really be something. And what was odd about it is that the following week, the Muslim Student Association did exactly that. I mean, not so much religion based, but cultures. They invited all of the different cultures represented in Rutherford County to set up a table and bring food.
Wow.
I remember that.
You were suggesting what?
Sounds like Church of the Holy Sepulchre in Jerusalem with all those languages going at once,
Yeah.
singing and marching and
It was like going, walking through a souk, a market area in a Middle Eastern city. It was lovely. It was a great event. But, I'm challenged thinking about it because of the pandemic. Hospitality and pandemic don't seem to go together very well. Of course, the pandemic's going to hopefully soon come, at least settle down to a place where we can be together,
Mhm.
for normal circumstances. But yeah, that creates a real challenge, I think.
Mhm. Yeah, and it's an imaginational hurdle for us. It's we've not been able to have the same kind of hospitality, and so our imaginations are rusty about imagining what could be. What could that be like?
It's almost like we've lost the incentive because we can't work with this virus and do the things that we like to do and we do well.
Mm-hmm.
It's the strangest feeling, but where we are, we have no idea. We're totally cut off. And it really, the incentive to really get a handle on this Jesus is kind of gone because we can't do what we want to do.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
I think we have to think along two separate tracks simultaneously. One track is what do we do now in our current circumstances, as we have been doing actually, and doing relatively well, I think, remarkably well, given the circumstances. But we also have to start thinking about what it's going to be like when this pandemic is over. And I think I don't know that we want to think that we'll just do the things we used to do before the pandemic started. But what are going to be the new opportunities?
Yeah. Yeah, and it's time to start imagining those things now because, it takes 3 months or 6 months to figure things out and get them planned and pull it off.
And we have to think in terms of what can we do under the current circumstances and what can we do after
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Well,
Yeah.
I think currently, I think maybe our call is regathering, bringing people back. I think we got to create connections again with each other. There's so many people I haven't seen, haven't heard from, and how do we regather? I think, and that's evangelism.
Mm-hmm.
Sharing the good news with each other to start.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that's a challenge, and that's important. An important part of our planning, I think.
Mm-hmm.
One of the things that comes to mind, of course, we won't be there, but to have welcome home Sundays, and it probably will take more than one to encourage people once we feel like it's safe, but to really do a lot of inviting, maybe even personally, to say, come on, we want, come on back and join us. We've missed you. We want, just like you said, David, people we haven't seen or heard from. Hopefully the church has, but we just don't really know who's out there in many senses.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's a real joy. The courtyard service, the 9 a.m. service, folks who have been pretty cautious, that's the service they're coming home to. That's the entry point. So we had 60 people there today.
Oh, wow.
It's just so fun. And, that's why I came rolling in a little bit late last week, because it's just so fun to see everybody coming home. But Jane Lee, I think you're exactly right. It's going to be personal invitations. Come on home.
Mm-hmm.
We're ready. Welcome home.
Yeah. And then have some things, somehow something afterwards when we can actually sit down and talk to people or have a cup of coffee or have, again, the hospitality. And of course, Episcopalians will come when there's food. That's just kind of the way it is. And so, but if you can do that and welcome people back, and
That's right.
it may take some time for some people before they feel comfortable, but I think it's going to be an ongoing thing for a while.
I think so.
It's great to know that you've had that kind of group there.
Yeah, it's fun week by week. More people are coming, more people are coming. They get their shots and here they are. Something I've been thinking about when you talk about evangelism, it presumes that we know Jesus is a friend, that we have something to say about Jesus, personal experience. Because I think evangelism that starts out with some faith proposition, that's dismal. Nobody wants to do that. But if you can tell about your friend Jesus and how he's made a difference in your life, I'm just channeling Gene Wise here. insert Gene's talk here. But to feel a call to evangelism presumes that we have a friendship with Jesus and experiences that we could share about. Say, let me tell you the story when I was 10 or when I was 30 and this thing happened. That I think is the very best evangelism. And so it may be that for us thinking about how do we as a church grow as evangelists is that we take time for a while here, just like we've been doing these past few weeks. Let's tell each other our stories. Let's tell stories about where we've seen Jesus. And if we don't know Jesus as a friend yet, which I think probably a lot of Episcopalians don't, let's spend some time just getting to know Jesus, so that we have something to say when all of a sudden we get someone from the community in our midst.
I was at a Cursillo weekend when I was just a person going. We had one of the clergy on the staff was Leo Lard, and Leo, wonderful priest, Cuban, and he didn't have the language that my ears could hear sometimes, but he was giving a talk and he had this repetition, my friend Jesus. Let me tell you what, he kept coming back to my friend Jesus, and I thought that's impossible. And by the time, of course, the weekend was over, I had my friend Jesus. But we've got a product to offer. We want to put it in those terms. But it's my friend Jesus. Walks with me. Just, I can guarantee it. That's one thing I can guarantee you. If you let it come, it'll come.
I think part of the, I hate to call it training, but it is training, is giving people an opportunity to tell those stories in ways that they don't feel uncomfortable. So many people are uncomfortable talking about Jesus in those terms that they're afraid of being accused of spiritual pride, or they're just uncomfortable about it. So giving an experience maybe with a small group of people where they're sharing stories gives them a license to say, to tell their story. And when they think about it, I hope everybody will have a story to tell.
I think you're really right on, Christine, because for me too, what brought me to Jesus was hearing other people's stories. and the willingness that they had to share those stories. You know, they just said, this is what happened to me. And when you can tell a story like that, and then at one point, what was it that people used to say, you need to have an elevator story where you can, you know, tell your story as you go up the elevator, maybe 2 floors, maybe 4, that may be getting a little more technical, but it is when we hear other people who can talk about that particular thing that really brings home the fact that Jesus is not way off someplace else or not even existent. He's actually right here.
Yeah. So think about the stories that you've told these past weeks. You know, we've told a lot of stories, wonderful stories about feasts, stories about simple meals, stories about giving hospitality and receiving hospitality. As you think back over the stories that you've told, is there any place in any of those stories that you would be able to look and say, oh yeah, that's a place where Jesus was present?
I always felt that when we had all of the Thanksgiving dinners at church, whenever everybody came and brought their favorite thing, and they were there with friends. And what was so interesting is as soon as they came out of church and into the parish hall, the tables were there, but people wanted to mingle and talk with each other. And you knew that Jesus was right there with us, you know, and just the fact of celebrating with each other in that particular situation and knowing that Jesus was present was really strong.
Uh-huh.
You know, I was at a gathering a few years ago, quite a few probably. And I heard a talk by a guy, a Roman Catholic, brother named Art D'Annunzio. And he told his story, gave a personal story, witness, some call it, but story. And I was really overwhelmed with it. And that night, I went into the chapel. And I got in there and I knelt down, and incense was there and all this. And I said, Lord, if you can do it for Art, please do it for me. And it was at that moment, being sure no one saw me. I mean, I wasn't going to let that out. But it was at that moment that I realized that he was there. He was there in all his glory. Didn't know what it meant yet, you know. But the point is, I heard it through that story. He told my story, and that's what we found. We play off one story and another, but I never forget that. It's whole years.
Yeah. Yeah. I think about that little story I just shared a few minutes ago about the graduate student who came and got fed dinner of saltine crackers and cheddar cheese. And, you know, I think as I look, I think Jesus was there making that enough, making it a feast. And, you know, I bet that graduate student has never forgotten, you know, this kind of humble hospitality that was offered, but there was a meal when he needed it.
Well, I know at my retirement reception, Jesus was very much present. Of course, it happened in the chapel, so it's easy to see Jesus present there. But with all the people and the, you know, there was wine, which helps, you know, but the camaraderie and the good wishes and people from all over, from the university, the church, the town, and just scads of folks. And yeah, I saw kind of an abundance of celebration, which was really wonderful. I very much appreciated that, but Jesus was telling me, see, see, yeah, you're not alone, and you haven't been forgotten, and you won't be. And
Yeah,
that was,
I bet that was a scary moment, retiring, because you were giving up that community. And were you going to be alone? Were you going to be okay?
yeah, and there was a sense of assurance, blessed assurance, but
Mhm.
it is blessed assurance, and it was really beautiful.
Mm. I think about my uncle's funeral. It was, gosh, 5 years ago, maybe now. My uncle spent his life farming on the family homestead in northern Montana. And, he was kind of a wayward guy, divorced 3 times. And, I think anybody who spends their life farming alone on a big ranch, that's a tough life in a lot of ways. But we had a Hutterite colony. The Hutterites, they're a German sect. They came from Germany and they live communally, kind of like the Amish or like the Mennonites. And so there was a Hutterite colony not too far from the farm. And they had especially been close, good neighborly with my grandpa, John, when he was farming the property. And they had, still always extended the hand of friendship to Bill, my uncle. But, there's just less closeness because my uncle had his own things going on. But I showed up at the cemetery that's out in the country, just adjoining the farm. And the Hutterites all showed up. They travel in a big truck, they pack as many people in the back as can fit, and they all showed up. And I just started weeping because I thought, you know what? This is a friendship that has carried across generations. And even though my uncle was kind of wayward and had some issues, at the end, he's still accepted into this fellowship of people who are beloved. And so Jesus was present to me in that, and seeing that kind of grace and that kind of acceptance and welcome.
I know, and many times, most of us, I don't know, only see where God's hand was with you or Jesus was standing by your side in hindsight.
Mm-hmm.
It's when we look back at something that happened that we said, aha, that we may not have, just been all enthralled or involved or whatever in what's going on at the moment. And sometimes it doesn't become clear until you look backward. And I think that's been true for me in a lot of spaces. I remember when we were living in Hollywood, Florida, and Jean was in the insurance business, and I was teaching part-time, and then I was a principal, but I was one of those that filled my days with all kinds of things that I wanted to do. And we had Kelly, and sometimes she was very happy with what we were doing, and sometimes she wasn't. But and this particular day it had been a really bad Sunday morning, trying to get everybody out of the house. And I finally got in church in the choir, and I sat down and I went, I give up. In my own heart, I just give up. I can't do this. And that morning, the priest was preaching, and he was a good preacher. And all of a sudden, I heard the word. He was talking about, our struggles in life. And he just said the words that people have repeated over: let go and let God. And it just hit me right between the eyes. And that was the beginning of my journey to find out who Jesus was. And, but I didn't realize it at the time. You know, looking back, I know it, you know, I can look, see it, but maybe not.
Yeah. Thank you, Jane Lee. Greg, it looked like maybe you were getting ready to say something.
Oh, I keep thinking, you know,
Uh-huh.
I think like Jane Lee, it's a long process for most people. And I think at the start, if somebody says this was Jesus in my life, see it, I would almost rebel. You
Uh-huh.
know, how are you so appointed by God to tell me that, you know, he's your speaking to you and you've got the authority to speak to me? And I think, you know, I that's been my impression sometimes of people who say, hey, I'm speaking for God. And it's like, wow, is that so?
Uh-huh.
You know, and so I think it's more the stories, the personal experiences, you know, you say, well, this is what it meant to me. You know, this is how I interpreted it. And I think, you know, you hear those over time and gradually you start to get your own experiences and you say, oh, okay, you know, this is way beyond chance. This is,
Yeah.
Yes.
yeah. Then
Yeah.
that's to me how it grows. You know, ultimately, a person concludes himself that this is Jesus. It's nobody, I believe, can tell another person and have it stick.
Yeah.
You know, you can inspire and somebody can then be curious and start to look. That's just how I've come to believe. You know, I know there's a lot of people that say, yes, let's go out and preach. And to me, I think they just push a fair number of people away.
Yeah.
It's live the life, and when people's ears open, tell the story that meant something to me. Or like my aunt, I remember her telling me her story. Seems like everybody's story is different. I remember yours about seeing the lights in Montana, I think it was.
Uh-huh.
It meant a lot to you, but I
Uh-huh.
don't think it would have meant that to me.
Right.
And then
Yeah.
there's things that, you know, are very meaningful to me that I doubt would mean much to you. It's sort of very individual, very unique, and
Yeah.
you know.
Yeah.
And I think sharing the stories helps. I really do.
Mhm.
In a sharing way as opposed to a telling way, you know.
Yeah. I
So
think part of what's such a nice encouragement, St. Paul says to us, you know, I planted, Apollos watered. Growing faith is for a lot of us, it's a lifelong process. You know, it's not,
yeah,
I'm going to do something and someone's going to come to faith this week or next year. But yeah, as you say, Greg, we've got this opportunity to just be attuned to what's going on around us and sprinkle some water and throw a
yeah,
seed out. And what God does with it is God's business, and God's pretty good at this, you know, better than we are.
yeah, I think so. I do. You know, I look at what's in the news and almost all of it's driven by fear because hey, our brains are wired to react to fear. And the bigger things never make the news. You know, the good stuff rarely does. The systematic good stuff almost never does. The hope for the future, usually you don't hear that.
Yeah.
And yet I think that drives most of this country to try and move forward, most people to move forward. It just doesn't make the news.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
I think part of one of the big failures of evangelism is we boil it down to a system. This is how you do it. And of course, that means that there is a way to do it. And if you do this, you'll have this result. And if you don't have that result, then you're a failure or something's a failure. But truth of the matter is, it's always a matter of context. It's always
yeah,
a matter of the individual person and the person you're talking to and the relationship you have. And if there's no relationship, you can't share anything. That's the whole point. The word is share. It's not
yeah,
convey, share. And that sharing is what makes evangelism beautiful and blessed, you know, because it when you're sharing, it's also rebounding back to you and there's a mutuality that is just beautiful. Who would not want to have
Yeah.
that experience?
Yeah.
In Palm Beach County, a few years ago, the clergy in smaller parishes cover for each other. And I was covering for a priest friend of mine, and he had a parishioner who was going to have an operation, Dorothy, and I went by to see her, kind of a crusty woman with language that exceeded mine. And she's going to have an operation, never been in a hospital in her life, and she's talking like it's just so easy. And I said, well, Dorothy, that's great. And I said, you know, why don't we pray? And I prayed, and I said, now, Dorothy, I don't know, you sound like you're doing well. I said, when you get on that table to take you in there, just reach out your hand and grab Jesus' hand, and I guarantee you'll find it. And she went by, she thanked me, she went by, and we went on vacation. Then a month later, I got a call, she was back in the hospital. They had to go back in again, serious surgery. And I went back there and I talked to her and said, prayed with her, and I headed for the door, and she said, it worked. And I said, well, what are you talking about, Dorothy? What worked? She said, I reached out my hand, just like I'm doing now, and I grabbed Jesus' hand. I thought, wow, that's really powerful. But you know, she would only live 6 months more, but the parish took her in and took care of everything in her life, and they were just there night and day. And she said it was Jesus.
Yeah.
That's a great story.
I'll see you in service.
Yeah, we are at time. Let me talk with you just a minute. David, you know the plans, so you can get to service. Let me talk with you a little bit about the plans between now and fall for this hour. Next Sunday is the Bishop's Visit and Mother's Day, so we will not have Sunday school. The 16th, we'll be back here on Zoom, and we're moving into a focus on outreach. So I'm hoping that we're going to get to hear from some friends in Cape Town about the justice ministry that they have, you know, conversation there about land reparations and racial justice is so interesting, and food justice. So I hope we'll be able to hear from them on the 16th. The 23rd is Pentecost, and we are going to be at Barfield Park at 10 a.m. for worship. So come to that, and we will have a picnic afterwards. So everybody will bring their own picnic, you know, bring your own blanket, and so we can sit and socially distanced share a meal together at Barfield Park on Pentecost. The 30th is Memorial Day weekend. So we can all talk about if we want to have Sunday school that day or not, you know, if you might be out at the lake or something. And then June 6th is the day that we are planning to move this class in person in the courtyard. So Jean and Jane Lee will still bring you in via Zoom.
Oh, good. Thank you.
Yep, but everybody else, if you want to come to the courtyard, and we'll just be outside in the courtyard. And we, on the 6th, will get to hear from our outreach folks about all the amazing things that are going on with outreach. Then the rest of June, we're going to go into a creation care theme, which I think would be really interesting. And in July, we're going to do, if COVID permits it, lemonade and cookies during this hour, just to welcome everybody home. So nice chance in the courtyard to be all together again. And if COVID is still raging, we'll still get together, but without the lemonade and cookies, just with our masks on. So that will be taking us through the end of July. Sound good? All right, let me pray for us. Lord God, we thank you. We thank you for these wonderful stories of family and abundance and food and meals and hospitality and And we thank you for giving us eyes to see, or at least wonder about maybe where you were present in all of that. And I ask, Lord, that you would help us to understand how you've been present. Give us the stories that are easy for us to tell, that help us to point other people in your direction, that can encourage or inspire them so that their faith in you can grow too. Lord, I ask that you would build our faith day by day. We thank you for your goodness to us, for the way that you are always with us, Lord Jesus. We pray in your name.
Amen.
Amen.
Thank you, and I will see you soon.
Thank you.
Mhm.